Millionaire CEO asked his son Theo, choose a mother from among the socialites, but he chose the maid. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Have you ever been forced to make a choice you never wanted to? Imagine a situation where a child is asked to pick their own mother, not based on love, but on social standing and wealth. Sounds impossible, right? But that's exactly what happened to 10-year-old Ethan Thompson. Ethan's father, John Thompson, was a successful CEO of a massive technology corporation. With a net worth in the billions, he was a man of wealth and influence. But while John had everything money could buy, there was one thing he lacked: a real family. Ethan's mother, Sarah, passed away when he was just a baby, and since then, John had thrown himself into work, raising Ethan on his own. But recently, John had become worried. Ethan had started to grow up without a motherly figure in his life. John knew he needed someone to fill that role, and he wasn't about to settle for just anyone. The only problem was, John didn't want a woman who would only love him for his money. He needed a woman who would love Ethan too, someone who could be the perfect mother figure. So, John decided to make a drastic move. He invited a selection of high society women to a private gathering, women who had the wealth, the status, and the beauty he thought would make them the perfect candidate to become his wife. But there was a catch. Ethan would be the one to choose. Ethan had always been quiet, observant, and very close to his father. He knew his dad was struggling with finding someone, but he had no idea what his father had planned for him. The evening of the gathering arrived, and Ethan was introduced to several women. They were all poised, elegant, and rich, each one with an impressive resume and connections in the social circles John navigated every day. But Ethan felt nothing. They were beautiful, sure, but something about them didn't feel right. They were all polished, perfect, and distant. Ethan didn't feel any warmth from them. As the evening wore on, John watched Ethan closely. His son didn't seem to connect with any of the women, and John was growing frustrated. Then, as the night was nearing its end, one of the housekeepers, Mary, entered the room to clean up. She was a quiet woman, in her 30s, who had worked for the family for years. She wasn't a socialite or a businesswoman, but she had always been kind to Ethan. As she quietly moved through the room, she noticed Ethan sitting alone by the window, deep in thought. She approached him gently and asked if he was okay. For the first time that evening, Ethan looked up and smiled. There was something comforting about her presence, something genuine. He nodded and began talking to her, the conversation flowing easily. John noticed this, his attention drawn to the interaction. Mary wasn't the type of woman he had imagined for himself, but there was something about her kindness and the way she connected with Ethan that he hadn't seen in the other women. It was then that John realized the most important thing he had been overlooking. As the night ended, John made an unexpected decision. Ethan had chosen his mother, not from the glitz and glamour of the socialites, but from the quiet, humble woman who had always been there for him. John couldn't believe it. But maybe, just maybe, the choice Ethan made was the one that mattered most. Ethan chose a mother who cared for him, not because of wealth, but because of love. John had never seen things so clearly before. His son had shown him the real meaning of family. As the evening wore on, Ethan found himself caught in a whirlwind of thoughts. He had made his choice, but he couldn't quite understand the magnitude of it. The women who had paraded through his father's mansion were everything he had been told to admire: wealthy, powerful, poised. But none of them made him feel at ease. None of them made him feel loved. But Mary, the housekeeper, the woman who had quietly taken care of him all these years, had somehow made him feel like he wasn't alone. In a world of superficial connections, for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt that warm, familiar feeling of comfort, the one he had lost the day his mother passed. Ethan looked at his father, who stood across the room, eyes narrowed with curiosity. John had always been a man of few words, but Ethan could sense his father's disapproval. John had wanted a woman with status, someone who could help him navigate the business world and add value to his public image. But Ethan didn't care about any of that. He didn't need a high society woman. He needed someone who would care for him, who would be there when he felt lost, someone who didn't pretend to be something they weren't. Mary wasn't perfect, but she was real, and that meant everything to Ethan. The night ended with an uneasy silence. John tried to hide his frustration, but it was evident in his stiff posture as he escorted the guests out. Ethan was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but as he lay in bed that night, he couldn't stop thinking about Mary. He had made the right choice, but he knew it would come with consequences. John wasn't the type of man to easily accept things he didn't understand. The next morning, John pulled Ethan aside before breakfast. His face was hard, his tone cold. "You made your choice, Ethan, but I need you to understand something. You're not just choosing a mother for yourself. You're choosing a future for our family. A woman like Mary, she won't fit into our world. Our world requires more than just kindness." Ethan stood his ground, his young heart heavy with the weight of his decision. "I don't care about our world, Dad. I care about what's real." John's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained control. "I'm giving you a chance to make the right decision. Think about it carefully, Ethan." That was the moment when Ethan realized just how much power his father held. John was offering him a choice, but it wasn't one based on love. It was based on what would benefit their image. Ethan couldn't let himself be swayed. He had already made his decision. He wasn't going to let his father's expectations cloud his judgment. As the day wore on, Ethan found himself thinking about Mary again. Her smile, the way she listened to him without judgment, the way she cared for him in a way no one else ever had. He wanted her to be part of his life, but he didn't know how to convince his father that she was the right choice. He decided he would speak to her the next day, tell her how much she meant to him. But as he prepared for the conversation, he wondered if he was ready for the consequences. Would his father disown him? Would Mary even accept the idea of being part of their world? He didn't know. But what he did know was that he couldn't go back. He couldn't let his father's world dictate his heart. The following morning, Ethan went looking for Mary. She was in the kitchen, her back turned as she prepared breakfast. He hesitated for a moment before walking up to her. "Mary," he said softly. She turned around, her eyes warm and kind. "Yes, Ethan." He swallowed hard. "I want you to be part of my life. I want you to be my mom." Mary's eyes widened in surprise, but then she smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that made Ethan feel like everything was going to be okay. "You're sure about this, Ethan?" she asked. He nodded, his voice firm. "I'm sure." Mary placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "Then we'll figure it out together." And in that moment, Ethan knew that his life was about to change forever. He had chosen love over status, truth over appearances, and he had found the one thing he had been searching for, a family. I should have known it wouldn't be easy. After Ethan made his choice, John was quiet, his disappointment hanging in the air like a dense fog. The next few days felt heavier than usual. Ethan could sense the tension between him and his father. John wasn't the type to show his emotions, but it was clear that this choice had shaken him. Ethan tried his best to ignore it, to focus on what felt right, but every time he saw his father, the weight of the situation was almost unbearable. He didn't want to lose his father's approval, but he knew deep down that the right thing was to stand by his choice. He had chosen Mary. She was the only one who had shown him unconditional care, the only one who had made him feel truly loved. The next weekend, Ethan decided to visit Mary at her small apartment. It was cozy, far from the grandiose mansion his father lived in, but there was a warmth to it that Ethan had always longed for. As soon as he walked in, he felt like he could breathe again. Mary was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared lunch. "Hey, Ethan," she greeted him with a warm smile. "What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I don't know if I can keep going like this, Mary. I feel like I've disappointed my dad. He's been distant ever since I chose you. I just don't want to lose him." Mary paused what she was doing and turned to face him. Her eyes were kind, understanding. She walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, you haven't disappointed anyone. Your dad is just afraid. He doesn't know how to love the way you do. But that doesn't mean you have to give up on what's important to you. You've made the right choice. The choice for yourself." Ethan nodded, the words sinking deep into his heart. He had never felt more understood than in that moment. "But how do I make him see that? How do I make him understand that this is real?" he asked. Mary smiled softly. "You don't have to prove anything to him, Ethan. Love doesn't need validation from anyone else. It's the one thing that stands on its own." Later that day, Ethan found himself sitting at the dinner table with Mary. They ate together, laughing, sharing stories, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan didn't feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. He felt lighter, freer. As he sat there, he realized that no amount of wealth or status could ever replace the feeling of being truly seen, truly cared for. As the evening went on, Mary told him stories of her own childhood, about how she grew up with little but always had the love of her family. Ethan listened intently, feeling more connected to her than ever. He knew that whatever happened next, he had made the right choice. The next day, John called him into his office. Ethan walked in, his heart pounding. His father was sitting behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Ethan," John began, his voice steady, "I've been thinking about your choice. And while I don't fully understand it, I've come to realize that it's not about what I want. It's about what you need. If Mary makes you happy, then that's enough for me." Ethan felt a weight lift off his chest as his father spoke those words. He hadn't expected it, but he was grateful. "Thank you, Dad," Ethan replied, his voice thick with emotion. John nodded, his eyes softening. "Just remember, Ethan, that family is more than blood. It's about love, and you've shown me what that truly means." Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of peace he had never felt before. He had chosen love over status, and in return, he had gained not only Mary's love, but also his father's acceptance. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Ethan couldn't believe how much had changed in just a few days. It felt like the storm had passed, and in its wake, he had found peace. Mary was there for him, and now, so was his father. John, the man who had always been a pillar of power and control, had finally shown him that love and family meant more than wealth and status. But even with his father's acceptance, Ethan knew that things wouldn't always be smooth sailing. The outside world was still skeptical, and John's business associates, who were used to seeing him with high-profile women, wouldn't understand why he had chosen someone like Mary. Yet, as Ethan sat in their small kitchen, sharing a quiet breakfast with Mary, he knew this was where he was meant to be. That morning, John had left for an important business meeting, and Ethan had decided it was time to talk to Mary about his plans. "Mary," Ethan began, his voice soft but determined, "I've been thinking. I want you to be part of everything. Not just in our home, but in my life. I want to introduce you to everyone. I don't want to hide you anymore." Mary looked up from her coffee, her expression warm yet thoughtful. "Ethan, you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. I'm happy with what we have," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. Ethan reached for her hand across the table. "But you deserve more than that. You deserve to be seen, not just as the housekeeper, but as the woman I love, as the person who's been there for me when I needed it the most." Mary smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm not doing this for the recognition, Ethan. I'm doing this because I love you. But if you think it's time to take the next step, I'm with you." Ethan felt his heart swell. She was everything he had ever wanted and more. The strength of her character, the kindness in her soul, it was all so real. There was no pretending, no need to impress anyone. She simply loved him for who he was, not for his father's wealth or his last name. Later that week, John invited Ethan and Mary to a charity event that his company was hosting. It was one of those high society galas where the rich and powerful came to show off their wealth and make connections. Ethan was nervous. He knew this was the moment that would define how the world saw his relationship with Mary. Would they accept her? Would they look at her the way they looked at the other women he'd been with? When they arrived at the event, Ethan felt the weight of the crowd's judgment immediately. The whispers, the sideways glances. It was as if they were all waiting for him to explain why he had chosen Mary over the other women. But Mary stood tall by his side, her calm and confidence radiating. She wasn't intimidated by their stares, and that made Ethan feel stronger than ever. He introduced her to a few of his father's business associates, trying to gauge their reactions. Some were polite, others seemed genuinely curious, but none of them treated her like she didn't belong. As the night wore on, Ethan realized something important. It didn't matter what they thought. What mattered was how he felt about Mary, how she made him feel loved, accepted, and seen. He didn't need their approval. When the event finally wound down, and the last of the guests had left, Ethan and Mary found a quiet corner on the balcony. In that moment, under the twinkling lights of the city skyline, Ethan knew that no matter what the world thought, he had everything he needed. He had love, and that was all that mattered. Ethan's life had shifted in ways he never imagined. The charity event had been a turning point, not just for his relationship with Mary, but for how he saw his family. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about finding the people who truly made him feel alive, and Mary had done that from the moment they met. But even with everything falling into place, there were still moments of doubt. Ethan knew his father hadn't fully embraced his decision. John had reluctantly accepted Mary into their world, but there was still a distance between them that couldn't be easily bridged. Ethan understood why. His father had built his empire with hard work and cold precision. He wasn't used to things being messy, to decisions made from the heart instead of logic. But Ethan was starting to realize that maybe he was okay with that. Maybe he didn't need to follow in his father's footsteps. He wasn't chasing the same dream anymore. He had Mary, and that was enough. One afternoon, as Ethan was walking home from the office, his phone buzzed. It was a message from John. "I need to talk to you. Meet me at the house." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't heard from his father like this in weeks, and the tone of the message felt urgent. He tried not to jump to conclusions, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When he arrived at the mansion, John was waiting for him in his study, the walls lined with books, the room filled with expensive art and photographs of the family's achievements. But today, John's usual stern expression was replaced with something more vulnerable, something Ethan rarely saw: regret. "Sit down, Ethan," John said, his voice softer than usual. Ethan took a seat across from him, trying to keep his composure. "What's going on, Dad?" he asked. John ran a hand through his hair, a sign of his frustration. "I've been thinking a lot about you and Mary. About your choices." Ethan's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what his father was about to say, but he braced himself. "I've spent my entire life building something for you. I thought I was doing what was best for you," John continued. "But I've realized I've been too focused on the wrong things. I've been so worried about what the world would think, about status, about money. I forgot about what truly matters." Ethan was silent, unsure if he should interrupt. This was a side of his father he had never seen before. "I was wrong to doubt you, son. I see now that Mary is exactly who you need, and I've been too proud to admit that." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "You mean it?" he asked, barely able to believe what he was hearing. John nodded. "I do. It's not about wealth. It's about love, and I see now that Mary offers you that in a way I never could." For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like his father truly saw him. Not as a successor to a business empire, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a man with his own heart and desires. "I want to make things right, Ethan," John said, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I want to welcome Mary into this family. The way she makes you feel, that's something special. And I've been blind to it." Ethan didn't know what to say. He had waited so long for this moment, for his father to truly see him, to accept his choices. And now, it was happening. "Thank you, Dad," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how much this means to me." John smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm proud of you, Ethan. You've taught me more than I ever could have imagined. It's time I stopped living for the world and started living for what matters." The two of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling in. Ethan had always believed that love and family were about more than just blood. And now, for the first time, he felt like his father was beginning to understand that too. Ethan sat quietly in the living room, watching the city lights flicker through the large windows. The evening had been a turning point for him, one he had never expected. His father, John, had finally admitted that he was wrong. For so long, Ethan had felt like he was chasing something his father could never give him. A sense of approval that had always been tied to status and money. But tonight, John had offered him something far more valuable: acceptance. As the days passed, things began to shift. The tension between John and Mary slowly melted away. It wasn't an instant transformation, but it was real. Ethan could see how his father's eyes softened whenever Mary was around. She wasn't just the housekeeper anymore. She was the woman who had captured Ethan's heart, and now, she was becoming part of the family in a way no one had ever anticipated. At dinner one evening, John surprised both Ethan and Mary by suggesting they take a weekend trip together. "Let's go to the mountains," John said, his voice lighter than usual. "You've both been working hard, and I think it's time we all spent some real time together." No business, no distractions. Ethan exchanged a look with Mary, surprised but pleased by the invitation. This was something he never thought would happen. His father, a man who had always been so focused on work, wanting to spend time with them. The weekend came, and the trip was everything Ethan had hoped for. They stayed in a small, cozy cabin in the mountains, far away from the pressures of the city. There, surrounded by nature and quiet, they began to truly connect. Ethan and John spent hours hiking the trails, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time, they didn't have to pretend. John opened up about his past, about the choices he had made and the regrets that had followed. "I spent so many years building this empire," John said as they sat on a bench overlooking the valley below. "But I neglected the one thing that truly matters. I was too focused on success to see what was right in front of me." Ethan nodded, understanding his father more than ever. "You're not alone in that, Dad," he replied. "I think we've all been chasing something. But I've learned that love and family are the real success." Mary, who had been preparing lunch nearby, overheard their conversation and smiled to herself. It was clear that the weekend was doing wonders for them. For the first time, John wasn't the powerful CEO who was always on the go. He was just a man, a father, a person who had learned the value of slowing down and cherishing what truly mattered. That evening, as they sat around a fire pit, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, Ethan realized that this was the family he had always wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. As the night drew to a close, Ethan found himself reflecting on everything that had changed. He no longer needed to prove himself to anyone. His relationship with his father, with Mary, was all he needed. He had learned that family wasn't about wealth or status. It was about love, trust, and being there for each other, no matter what. Looking at his father and Mary, he knew that they had all come a long way. What had started as a choice between wealth and love had turned into something far more meaningful. And in that moment, Ethan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as a family. Ethan had never felt more at ease. The weekend in the mountains had brought an unexpected peace, and it seemed as though everything was falling into place. John, his father, had truly opened up in a way Ethan hadn't thought possible. For the first time in his life, he saw his father not as a powerful CEO, but as a man who had lived through his own struggles and regrets. It was in those quiet moments, surrounded by nature, that John had admitted his mistakes. They had spent hours together, talking, hiking, and even laughing, something that had been a rare sight between them. But as the week went on, Ethan felt a strange sense of unease. It wasn't the changes with his father or his growing relationship with Mary. It was the looming reality of what would happen when they returned to the city. John had already begun to make amends, but there were still business deals, high society expectations, and the pressure of maintaining an image. Would everything they had gained be able to withstand the harshness of reality? Would the world outside their family understand the choices they had made? On Monday morning, Ethan went to the office, the familiar hum of the building making him feel like he was stepping back into another world. As he walked through the doors, he was greeted by his colleagues, but something felt different. The usual smiles and polite chatter seemed forced. Ethan could sense that people were talking behind his back. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone would question his relationship with Mary. It was inevitable. As he sat at his desk, his phone buzzed with a message from his father. "I need to talk to you about something important." Ethan's heart sank. He had been dreading this moment. He quickly made his way to John's office, his mind racing with thoughts of what could be wrong. When he arrived, John was standing by the window, looking out over the city. His face was tense, but there was a certain calmness to him. "Sit down, Ethan," John said, his voice steady. "We need to address something." Ethan sat across from his father, feeling the weight of the moment. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cautious. John turned to face him, his expression serious. "I've been thinking about our family, about everything that's been happening. I'm proud of you for standing by your decisions, Ethan. But there's something we need to discuss." Ethan's stomach churned, unsure of where this conversation was headed. "What is it, Dad?" he asked again, his heart pounding. John sighed, a look of concern crossing his face. "I've heard the rumors. People are talking. They're questioning Mary's place in our world. They don't understand why you chose her, why you're choosing to live outside the expectations I set for you. And I'm afraid it's starting to affect the business." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud was different. Dad, Ethan began, his voice trembling slightly. I'm not going to apologize for my choice. Mary is the person I want in my life. She's the one who's been there for me, not because of my name or my father's wealth, but because she cares about me. She's real. John's expression softened. I know, Ethan, and I admire you for your conviction. But the reality is, people won't accept this easily. They want to see you follow in my footsteps. They want to see you make decisions based on power and status, not love. Ethan felt a wave of frustration rise inside him. I don't want to follow your footsteps, Dad. I want to carve my own path. And that path leads to Mary. I don't care what the world thinks anymore. John remained silent for a moment, as if contemplating Ethan's words. Finally, he nodded. I understand, Ethan. I've been so focused on my own world that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. But I don't want you to lose yourself in this. I want you to be happy. Ethan felt a surge of relief. For the first time, he felt like his father truly understood. But the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. They both knew that. Thanks, Dad, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady. John looked at him, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. I'll support you, Ethan, and I'll do my best to make sure this doesn't affect you or Mary. As Ethan left his father's office, he felt a sense of determination settle in his chest. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to back down. He had chosen Mary, and nothing was going to change that. They would face whatever came next together. Ethan sat at the desk in his apartment, the weight of the conversation with his father still lingering in his mind. He had always known his father's expectations, the heavy burden of being the heir to a legacy built on ambition and status. But for the first time, Ethan truly felt like his father had accepted him for who he was, not as an extension of his empire, but as a man with his own desires and values. It felt like a victory, but it was still bittersweet. Outside, the city buzzed with the usual noise, the hum of traffic, the chatter of people rushing through their busy lives. Ethan looked out the window, wondering how long this new peace would last. The next few weeks passed in a blur of small victories. John kept his promise to support Ethan, but there were moments when the pressure of maintaining appearances crept in. Ethan's relationship with Mary continued to grow stronger, despite the outside world's judgment. They spent evenings at home, just the two of them, enjoying simple moments. Yet, even in those quiet times, Ethan could feel the subtle pull of his father's influence. John had told him he would support his decision, but Ethan couldn't help but wonder how much that support would stretch if the business world continued to whisper behind his back. One day, John invited Ethan to a business dinner at one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. Ethan hesitated, unsure if it was the right time to return to that world. But he knew his father, and he also knew that John wanted to prove to the world that their family could still stand tall, even if they had chosen a different path. As they entered the grand dining room, Ethan felt the familiar tension in the air. The rich, polished atmosphere, the clinking of wine glasses, the soft murmur of important conversations. It was the world his father thrived in, the world he had never fully embraced. He looked at Mary, who was standing by his side, her hand resting gently on his arm. She had never been one for high society events, but tonight, she was here because of him. They were a team. He squeezed her hand, offering her a reassuring smile, but deep down, he felt a twinge of doubt. The dinner was filled with discussions of business deals, market trends, and the usual power plays. John and his colleagues spoke with ease, their voices confident and commanding, but Ethan felt out of place. His thoughts kept drifting back to the quiet moments with Mary, the peace he had found in her presence, away from the noise of the world. At the end of the dinner, John raised a glass, his voice commanding the room's attention. To family, he said, his gaze meeting Ethan's. To the future, Ethan felt the weight of the moment. It was an unexpected gesture, one that made him realize just how far his father had come. It wasn't about the business anymore. It was about the people who mattered. After the dinner, as they were leaving the restaurant, John pulled Ethan aside. I know this world isn't easy for you, John began, his voice quieter now. But I want you to know that no matter what, I'll support you. I may not fully understand your choice, but I see the man you've become, and that's enough for me. Ethan looked at his father, a sense of warmth spreading through him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he could breathe. He had made his choice. He had chosen Mary, and his father, though reluctant at first, was beginning to accept it. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Ethan felt ready to walk it, knowing he had the support of both his father and the woman he loved. Ethan stood at the balcony of his apartment, looking out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, a reflection of the life he was beginning to build. It had been months since the dinner with his father, months since he had made the decision that would change his life forever. His relationship with Mary had only grown stronger, and they had found a rhythm that worked for them. They spent their days together, building their lives, and their nights were filled with laughter, love, and dreams of the future. Ethan couldn't have imagined a better outcome. He had faced challenges, no doubt, his father's initial reluctance, the judgment of the outside world. But through it all, he had stayed true to himself. He had chosen love, and that choice had given him everything he needed. As the days passed, he watched as his father's relationship with Mary continued to evolve. John, once a man consumed by work and status, had become more involved in their lives. He was no longer the cold, distant CEO who had built his empire alone. Instead, he was becoming part of the family, genuinely caring for the people around him. Ethan was proud of how far they had come, but he knew that their journey wasn't over yet. There would always be challenges ahead, but they would face them together. As he stood there, lost in thought, Mary walked up behind him and wrapped her arms around him. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her voice soft and comforting. Ethan smiled, turning to face her. "Just thinking about everything we've been through," he replied. "How much has changed, how much we've grown." Mary's eyes softened, and she kissed him gently on the cheek. "I've always believed in us," she said. "We've made it this far because we have each other." Ethan nodded, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had chosen love, and in return, he had found everything he had been searching for. He had found a family, a future, and a life filled with warmth and meaning. He wasn't living for the expectations of others anymore. He was living for himself, for Mary, and for the love they shared. As they stood there, side by side, watching the city come alive beneath them, Ethan knew that the future was bright. He had everything he needed right here, in this moment. They were home, and for the first time in his life, he truly understood what that meant.